My name is Jason Weaver. I'm the Director of Product Management and Parchment. And today I'm pleased to be leading our discussion on the Comprehensive Student Records Project. We're going to hear from leaders at both University of Maryland, University College, and the University of Central Oklahoma about their learnings from institutional efforts around rethinking credentials for today's higher education environment. I'm very happy to introduce our panelists. First, Joellen Shendy from UMUC. At UMUC, Joellen is the Associate Vice Provost and Registrar, and she's been leading the efforts around the extended transcript that's a part of the CSR project. Good afternoon, Joellen. Also with us today is Dr. Adam Johnson from University of Central Oklahoma. At UCO, Adam is the Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Management and Registrar. We've allotted time today at the end of each presentation by the institutions for questions. You'll find a question chat at the bottom, so please feel free to type your questions in there and we'll circle back to continue the discussion. So with that, Joanne, let's talk about UMUC's extended transcript.
Great, thank you. Hope everybody can hear me fine. So I'm going to share a little bit today about what we did in terms of an extended transcript, our reflections on that, what we learned, and then what we see as the next step here at UMUC, or I should say steps, because there's some plurality coming in here of what we're planning on doing. So the first question we asked, and I think many of you are already familiar with this concept, is why are we even thinking about a new type of record or for us an extended transcript? And I think it's easily summed by considering the state of alignment between workforce and higher ed and the skills gap and mismatches that are occurring within that workplace, institution, or university pathway. And then as more institutions look at competency-based learning programs, focusing on the skills, workplace skills, a scalable digital communication is really where we're at in 2017 and where we should be at for our students. So what is the extended transcript? Essentially, it's just common format for storing all these achievements. And the achievements can come from anywhere. So they could be competencies in a course, they could be assessments, they could be some form of career-ready skills, it could be a badge, it could be co-curricular, it could be internships. There's really a wide plethora of opportunity to include learning and achievements of students inside of this type of document. So in order to explore this a little bit, we were part of the Lumina Comprehensive Student Records Project from AACRAO and NASPA, and we have phased our project essentially. And so in phase one is what we did within that project. What it was designed to do, our extended transcript, was a natural fit really with the evolution of a learning model at UMUC, which has been shifting. So while we still have credits and units and grades as normal, we are moving more to a model that focuses on what learners can do, more competency framework driven. And there are a few things inside of that model that really drove the change and the need for a new type of documentation. From the faculty's point of view, once they're redoing their curriculum from a programmatic lens, they really wanted to make sure that was apparent and visible to the student so the student understood the changes, and so that those competencies that students were seeing and being assessed against in the classroom were appearing in more than just that space. So how to figure out in terms of students, how do I use this information now, this new way that I'm obtaining my learning, and turn it into, and have something to show for it, or turn it into something that will help me speak confidently about what I know and can do. As most of us know, there's not a lot to say when you bring a transcript to an employer. Mostly they're verifying the degree on the transcript. Most students, hopefully, I've heard a few, don't say, well, I took a class in this, or because that doesn't really tell the employer about the fit of the student and their particular skill set in relation to what the employer is desiring in a future employee. So our new learning model was a really big fit, project-based, and again, a competency framework. So we had a lot of folks helping us. I would be remiss not to point it out. There's some bit.ly links in here, and since this will be made available afterwards, you can learn more about the Comprehensive Student Record Project and about IMS Global, which is a standards organization who has led a lot of us in they're facilitating, trying to put things together. So the extended transcript, I think you could misinterpret this and go in the wrong direction and assume it's really only about the technology capacity that we might have now to display these. But it's not. It really requires a lot of leadership and buy-in, and you have to have programs and programmatic components that are amenable to being drawn out in terms of data, with data aggregation and reporting on those competencies. You've got to have a critical component, some sort of standard-based integration, because it's likely most of us don't have all this information in one system. So you got to have a way to get it from one system to the other. And you have to have something where at the end of the day, we're not going to just, every institution in the country is going to produce a different document, because that's probably going to cause more confusion and chaos than help. So that's the tactics or the idea that we took. Although I highly doubt many people on the phone are interested, they're actually, the code that we use to produce the extended transcript is free, and it is on GitHub, and the bit.ly links are in here for you. On the right on your screen, you can see what our originally imagined code looked like. At the end of the day, what we got didn't quite look like that, and that's to be expected anytime you're looking at prototyping. But the link at the bottom here, should you want to use it at your leisure, will actually give you the most current format that we're working on. Every once in a while, the link gets a little funny because it's an actively worked environment, so we are sort of making changes. There's no, for the registrars in the room, there's no real student data in here. Olivia Hafez is fake. Peyton Andrews is fake. Bill Gates is not fake, but he didn't go to school here. So there's no FERPA issues with that. But you're welcome to go in and take a look if you feel so inclined. So our pilot, what did we do? So after we got everything situated, I'm going to go over that a little bit. Our pilot was really designed to test this concept for student feedback, content and usage of the tool itself, really, inside of some of our classrooms within our new learning model. Because UMEC is a very large school, we're about 85,000 students, our pilot was around 2,000 students. I think it ended up to be slightly more, but right around there. The extended transcript was accessed by those students 1,487 times. We were particularly proud of that number because that's a lot of utility in terms of a tool that you're giving students. If anyone's familiar with open rates on emails and whatnot, I'm pretty happy with about a 50% use of the tool. Students had access to this document, this interactive tool from mid-December through the end of March, and 57% of everyone that accessed it was unique. So that means essentially pretty much 6 out of every 10 people in the classes accessed it to take a look at it. The students accessed it in their classroom, and I'm going to show you what that view looked like so you can get an idea. So as far as us for our communication plan, we were very fortunate. We had a lot of support from leadership at the highest levels, from our faculty. I do think, so this is where some of the different participants in the comprehensive student record have different viewpoints. So UMEC is an adult-facing, adult-serving institution. We are open access. And so our faculty are largely adjunct. Not all, but there's a big chunk of adjuncts. They have a very vested interest and enjoy coaching and mentoring in many cases. They like to feel like they're contributing. They're just a different population than the full-time faculty. And so when it introduced to them, they were certainly very willing and wanted to look at it and could see the utility of it. Many of them work in their fields in their day-to-day life. So not only are they faculty, but they're also employers. So that's a different type of frame, perhaps, than someone whose main focus or role is entirely institutional. So that was a help for us, very much engaged with this project. Our communication plan that we used was much like you would expect. So our marketing department created a couple of web pages. We did, and this was a kind of a soft rollout, all things considered. We basically did a couple of emails, and that was pretty much it, other than putting the link in the classroom, because part of what we were trying to figure out is, you know, is this a tool that students know what to do with and how will they use it, rather than giving them extensive background in what it was. All of our student-facing teams were aware of it, knew what it looked like. They did not have access to it. It was really solely the students who did, but they certainly knew what it was about. The information tech, obviously this took a fair amount of lift in our IT department to get this put together, and then again our schools were involved with it. So this is, and you can probably see better when you download the presentation after, but we had 2 different web pages that were available to students and others who were interested. One was an extended transcript FAQs that just basically answered the questions we thought students were going to have. And the other was more about the extended transcript, explaining the project. And again, we really made this very tight, not multiple links all over the place. It really was in one spot and pretty succinctly explained. So what did it look like for students? So when the student goes into their classroom and UMUC uses D2L or learning management, Brightspace learning management, this is what it looks like. When they go in, these are the icons they can click on. You can see in the bottom that extended transcript icon, second from the left on the very bottom, that's what they clicked on to have access to their extended transcript. So this is being viewed inside of a SSO authorized environment. The student is who they say they are with their password and whatnot, and then they would click on the link and their official extended transcript would pop up. And then I'll get into a little bit more here what it looks like. So Peyton Andrews, not a real name. I wanted like Gandalf, but everybody voted me down. However, so we have Mr. Andrews here. The document shows that a student was in a Master of Business Administration. The course is Organizational Leadership. And underneath it, it talks about the different competencies that the student would have demonstrated. So one of the intriguing things is our survey was located inside of the transcript and that little I button right next to where it says official transcript, which was kind of interesting that we actually had about 70 people do the survey. Again, pretty happy with those numbers in general, considering it wasn't necessarily super obvious where it was at. One of the other features that we had was we were able to allow the student, if they chose to do so, to print the document. Again, the name of the program and the class is there. The name of the competency, the sub-competencies are what the learner could do. And then we had 2 kind of unique pieces, and one of these was at the request of the faculty. So the way that our program is structured is it's a very scaffolded learning experience for the students. So whatever competency they're working on, it's going to be demonstrated by them multiple times across different contexts. The idea is that while the domain can change, the content can change in a discipline, that the way that you use data or the way that you analyze it or assess it or take all those, apply those KSAs to it can change, and that allows you to demonstrate a different type of mastery. So we would have multiple pieces of evidence required for mastery as the student demonstrates this competency in several different ways. The other component that we did not really turn this on because we didn't have a location to store things. We're talking with our library now, but there is a possibility inside of this document because it's digital. It's really a web page, so I say document, but it is a web page that you can interact with and click through and compress and decompress and whatnot, is the ability for students and or the university to include artifacts of learning inside of the document itself. So what you might typically see now in a portfolio, there are elements of that you could put right inside of this document. So whether it's a simulation or a video of something the student did, perhaps it's a speech, perhaps it's a project of some kind, etc. So we did it, I know there's a question, we pulled all of this information out of our LMS, not out of our SIS. We use PeopleSoft, and other than the feed that goes into the learning management system in general for all students, there was no data pulled out of PeopleSoft whatsoever. It was all in the LMS. So that is why it was a pilot, because we know we're going to have to pull some other data from other sources, and that's currently what we're working on, is figuring out what other information do we want in this document. When we asked students, and this will get to some of those points. So that was our pilot essentially. It was very simple in some facets and really geared again towards student feedback. So what did the students think? For the most part, when we asked the question, many of them really did resonate with this idea that I could use this type of tool or document with a future employer. I think that's what most of us believe. We also offered them the option to say, would you use it for an admissions office at another institution? How about for your current employer? And how about for your friends and family? So the only thing we saw that really had no representation here was friends and family. So apparently we don't have a very sharing group of students here that want to share it with their friends and family, which is fine. And I think none of this was super surprising. The fact that quite a few students might share it with all of the above, meaning they might consider it for more than one use, is pretty heartening for us that they could see a utility beyond just giving it to a future employer as a quote-unquote transcript. One of the other questions, and this is actually, frankly, the pivotal question in the whole thing, because this pilot was designed for and meant to demonstrate students' kind of understanding of the competencies or their capability to use this type of tool or conceptually use it in future opportunities, whatever those might be. We really wanted to see more, would it give you more confidence when searching for future opportunities? We wanted to see more yes and a little fewer not sure, frankly. So what this tells us that we have some work to do. It wasn't a really hard rollout, so that affected it. But we also know just because you give the student a document, no matter what's on that document, does not mean they know what to do with it. And so after this, and you'll see in some of the lessons learned, we realized that the old model, the non-formative model, the kind of dead document model that we have there's not really much surrounding that as far as tools and coaching and guidance about how you might use it. It's pretty much a straight shot. Request it from us, we'll give it to your employer, it'll go through screening, you have the degree, you don't, maybe a few employers will look at GPA or content or courses, but by and large it's just a really quick checkbox. And so with new tools, students need better understanding of how it fits holistically and how they might be able to really leverage it and use it. And so in some ways that reinforced to us that the concept of students understanding the connections in their learning and what's going on and how they can leverage all that they know, how they can identify and leverage it, still remains a challenge in higher ed. So what else would they like to see on the extended transcript? This was probably the most surprising slide because we have adult students who aren't 20. Their average age is somewhere in the mid-30s. So when they came back and said, oh, I'd like to see clubs and organizations and awards and honors, which we don't do a ton of, I think we were a little bit surprised at the percent that came back with the desire to include more than academic content. So that's a bit of a paradigm shift for the institution to kind of consider that these things have a relevance and a meaning to students, and they see them as potentially part of their record. I'm not quite sure how if we view them the same way, again, given our mandate and our mission. So that's very interesting, and I think we have a lot to learn from our colleagues like University of Central Oklahoma about how to incorporate some of these elements. So at the end of the day, survey, we asked them, would you recommend that we provide it to other students? 84% of the people who took the survey said yes. One student, I thought perhaps the student summed it up the best, why wouldn't you? If you have the capacity and you can, why wouldn't you? So some of the questions that were answered are obviously the concept of it, looking at a bigger picture of what the student is accomplishing is good. Instead of the graduate saying, oh, I have this GPA, I took this class, you can actually talk about your competencies, what you can do, and that hopefully lends to more value-add conversations with future employers, institutions, etc. Again, what did we learn? So we learned that career services do not belong only at the end of the day. The formative nature of this type of tool, which is with the students to interact as they start their program and as they go through their program, rather than being something they pay for at the end, really needs a new model as far as support and understanding about how they can use it. And this is probably the pivotal point here is if you give them these tools, you have to help them figure out how they can use them. You have to help them put this tool in the framework of their of who they are and how they're going to portray themselves, how this could potentially help them identify gaps in their own learning is also another component that we touched on. The students themselves in the focus groups, we didn't really ask questions specifically related to this in the survey, but in the focus groups, it was so abundantly clear, no one could mistake it, that their desire for industry connection to their competency achievement was absolutely critical. We had students who were like, look, you can give me all these competencies and all that I did, and yes, it looks great, but what I really want is for you to tell me, for example, of all of these I have, what's hot right now with employers? What do I want to leverage when I go out looking for a position, or whether that's advancement or a new position? What can I do? Like, what is it about what I can do that would set me apart from other folks? So that was really prevalent. The other thing we learned was that, although I think traditionally we sort of see it as the same thing, there is a user experience of some form of a, if you want to say document or web page or portfolio, it doesn't really matter. There's that user experience of that content, and then there's the data behind it. And they're not the same thing, although certainly one relies on the other, but that it might be time for us to start thinking, well, there's a way that we imagine it for the student, and then there's a way we can package and share and use that data in fundamentally new ways that really changes the equation and the question. So, for example, if we're trying to establish something that helps students match their competencies to employment opportunities in their field or out there in the real world, that's really a data-related component, not so much a user experience component. So there's several different ways that you could engage with this type of concept. Not all of them are building and using a new UE, essentially, if that makes sense. So what's our next step? So UMUC is working to find a way to help students match their competencies to employment opportunities. We're piloting with Credential Engine to support the credential registry. If you have not looked at that, if you just type in Google Credential Engine, you can kind of see how that's working. And then we're working quite a bit with our own Career Services Department portal to use that, which is a kind of a portfolio-driven portal, to help students by pulling in their competencies themselves. And this is what that looks like. So on the right, this is from a student or a user's point of view, not from an employer, but you can see that in the portal, in this career portal that we have, you can, if you're a user, a student, you can actually indicate what your filters are. You know, what's my category, what's my security clearance, what's my classification, what was my major, my degree. But employers can also use those to search. So what we're looking at is adding another piece of a filter to filter based on competencies, so that an employer could look at the competencies that a student has and choose in a bigger way, like I want someone who at least has these 10 competencies, and then it would filter that way. So that's really very kind of cool. And then this is just a piece of the Credential Engine credential registry, which is not time for us to talk about today, but that's yet another component for surfacing the type of data that goes into an extended transcript as far as a nationwide credit registry. So that's what we're doing, and that's where we're going. And I talk fast, so hopefully everybody, if you have any questions, type them in the box. But that's it for us. We're busy. We're busy beavers over here in DC.
Yeah, absolutely, Joelle, and thank you so much. There seems like a tremendous amount of great learnings that you guys have come through in this experience. You talked a little bit about next steps. Can you elaborate on how you think expanding populations of your students will get access to the extended transcript?
Yeah, actually, and when we go back to the technology component, there's a piece here that is really related to the capacity to, for example, reflect competencies earned outside of the institution on this document. So this works really well when you're talking about a student taking a course and completing the outcomes or competencies here, where I think most of us probably haven't gone, is what happens when that learning occurs elsewhere. and it leads into conversations about competency articulations versus course articulations and whatnot. But for us, the plan is to move this forward for all graduate programs probably within the next year or so, and then at the same time in parallel to figure out in what way can we grapple with and handle this concept of transfer credit. We're heavily transfer. Average transcripts submitted by incoming students is 4 to 5. So we are really heavily transfer. And how do we reflect that education inside of a record like this? So that's the challenge, but we will go for graduate school, the rest of the graduate school, probably legit pretty shortly in comparative to the longer-term strategic pieces.
But it really is an evolution over time, it sounds like, both in terms of the populations of students that you're supporting with this and the content, just what is it that you're giving students. And so that's really excellent work. Great. Thank you so much, Joellen. Again, as you all have questions for Joellen, we'll circle back in just a little bit and cover those. We have a couple in the queue, but please feel free to use that chat window to add more. In the meantime, again, we've got Dr. Adam Johnson with University of Central Oklahoma with us. And so, Adam, your project is the Student Transformative Learning Record, or STELLAR. So let's hear about it.
You bet. And I think you're going to hear a lot of crossover in terms of terminology, language, research, and evaluation between what Joellen just said compared to what I'm going to talk about. And I got a lot to cover, so bear with me on my speed of talking here. So before I get into the details about UCO's involvement in the CSR project, I need to explain how we got to this point, and that starts with UCO's STLR, or STELLAR Initiative, the Student Transformative Learning Record. UCO first had discussions about transformative learning concepts way back in 2004 and turned it into a full-on initiative by 2006 through our academic affairs and student affairs divisions to make transformative learning more intentional in and out of the classroom. Our president and provost at the time believed we wanted to track learning beyond disciplinary learning, and we also felt this was consistent with our institutional mission and overall approach for learning. We wanted to advocate a purposeful, lifelong, and life-wide learning ethos for students, which we hope should equip them for 21st century job skills. We've gone through the phases of conceptualizing through operationalizing for over a decade now, and after some rephrasing of what to call these transformative learning experiences, we ultimately settled on the name of STELLAR. The development of what we call the Central Six Tenets, which really are categories of transformative learning and application of Mesereau's transformative learning theories in adult learning and best practices of TL at UCO, were all finely tuned to create a holistic approach to student learning and transformation. So we decided to settle on these 6 tenets: discipline knowledge, global and cultural competencies, health and wellness, leadership, research, creative and scholarly activities, service learning, and civic engagement. We'll take another look at these tenets in later slides, but these essentially are the core of how we identify those transformative learning experiences. We were notified in September of 2014 that we had been awarded a $7.8 million Title III Strengthening Institution Programs grant to support our STELLAR projects, which was just a huge incentive for us, obviously. And funding began that next month in October. We had already launched with institutional funding and support a very small STELLAR pilot project with that fall term, where we had 14 stellarized classes and 10 stellarized student affairs activities across the term. And by the way, stellarized means at least one tenet has been associated to the assignment or activity, and it's a means of assessing the student's STELLAR badge level achievement, and it's in place. So the STELLAR Advisory Board was also key to linking our efforts with employers, and that group consisted of 20 members of various areas of commerce.
And so, Adam, that's interesting because Joellen talked a little bit about the desires that learners had for kind of engagement with employers. You all took the approach of kind of having that advisory council. So thinking about engaging the employers and how they understand the STELLAR, what kind of feedback have you received?
Right. And that's what this next slide shows. In fact, this was just a sample picture of our STELLAR Employer Advisory Board back in August of 15, just at a breakfast convening. The group started meeting quarterly, but since then we've reduced meetings to twice a year during the fall and spring. And as I mentioned, it consists of 20 members ranging from education industry, the communications, insurance, finance, technology, manufacturing, energy, and more. And as I said, they all convene in downtown Oklahoma City. So at the meetings, we explain updates about Stellar, get input from attendees about the best way to communicate Stellar to employees, and engage in activities to help explain Stellar in terms of tenant matching activities, conducting mock interviews of Stellar students. We show any new videos we produce, and they can even rate a student's e-portfolios, which we'll talk more about that later too. We also send periodic email updates and invite members to various events. And one member, this is something I wanted to definitely talk about as well, one member gave us a huge opportunity and arranged a key meeting with AT&T's CEO and VP of Corporate Leadership Development, Randall Stevenson, who actually got his undergrad degree at UCO. He's had a long interest in the intersection of education, technology, and innovation, so he's actually been eyeing Stellar for quite a while. The AT&T corporate headquarters in Dallas is taking about 5 to 15 of our graduates and rising seniors, which they'll be doing internships this next May and June for fast tracking directly into their corporate leadership development programs in a number of job areas ranging from cybersecurity, accounting, management, entertaining, marketing. And the hiring process will be a test for AT&T of both the CSR and the Stellar e-portfolio. The purpose of this research partnership is for AT&T to verify that our grads in these job categories possess the specific beyond disciplinary skills for each category, because the grads have developed skills across the range of things Stellar develops. Then AT&T will field test Stellar to ensure that a Stellarized grad who, just for example, is hired into their cybersecurity division, that they possess the specific beyond disciplinary skills they already know in cybersecurity workers. They're not asking us to develop job-specific Stellar templates that grads must just check the box and when applying for positions. However, they want to test that Stellar hits on the specific things they know they need in specific workers, whether it's, again, cybersecurity, accounting, etc. It's going to be a 3-year commitment from AT&T, and the bottom line is that this is going to be a tremendous opportunity for UCO to truly test the effectiveness of Stellar along with the CSR within a global company of about 300,000 employees. So it's going to be a huge bonus for us. Because we considered Stellar to be a brand new and, dare I say, groundbreaking initiative that emphasizes transformative learning, it became clear to us we need new assessment tools. We wanted to ensure we have a method of identifying, tracking, and recording instances of transformative learning, as well as to make sure it's authentically assessed, regardless of the context. So there are 4 ways a student can be assessed to achieve credit. In the classroom, of course, students are also assessed through a co-curricular exposure event. Third is a co-curricular planning or implementation project, and finally through a Stellar-backed project. So to that end, the Office of Institutional Effectiveness, who also collaborated with our Center for Transformative Teaching and Learning, created these robust rubrics that are now used by over 400 faculty and staff across campus to assess that transformative learning in the classroom. The Stellar team developed these rubrics directly from student learning outcomes drawn from the AACNU value rubrics, which are the validated assessment of learning in undergraduate education. But we also incorporated existing body of knowledge on transformative learning theory into the rubrics as well. And since its inception, Stellar Assessment has developed a more comprehensive approach to measuring not only student learning, but also other aspects of our program, such as training and development for these efforts. For instance, each cohort of faculty staff that completes both of our training modules, they complete 2 surveys at the end of the training. In one, the faculty and staff present their initial understandings and personalized plans for implementing Stellar into their own activities in and out of the classroom, and individual feedback is provided to them. In another survey, participants get the opportunity to evaluate the effectiveness of the training modules and the facilitators. So results from both surveys are administered and reviewed by the Stellar staff and go on to further improve our training curriculum. Feedback is continuously provided to all faculty and staff who are implementing Stellar across the campus.
So, Adam, it sounds like you've got a lot that goes into kind of the process around Stellar and staff, but can you talk a little bit about how you market that to students?
Sure. Let me first say that being involved with the CSR development effort really helped speed our communication plan exponentially. We were assigned 2 consultants, as everyone was, through the Lumina project, one representing AACRAO and the other from NASPA, and they conducted site visitations as well as reviewed our documentation. I mention that because sometimes having an external reviewer can speed up an institutional effort. They helped us develop a plan that targets students, of course, but including faculty and deans, department chairs, staff, parents, employers, and even creating an other category just to recognize those other key decision makers, which may represent state and local leaders, folks from Chamber of Commerce, alumni, and et cetera. We realized by going through this process just how important it was to think individually about audience, communication, and even policy considerations. Each audience has different components, obviously, but we consider strategies such as email campaigns, social media pushes through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have Stellar newsletters. We also use vinyl tenant-specific indoor and outdoor banners hung across the campus at all of our Stellar events. We've created videos, both student, faculty, and staff created. Our career service connection points, integration in our first-year Success Central course, prospective student literature, and even in new faculty and staff orientations and others. However, our goal with Stellar has always been to reach students primarily through faculty. This is because, and it's similar to what Joellen was talking about her population, we have a very large commuter population as well, and we understand that many of our students only come to campus to go to class and then leave. So we provided several resources to faculty to explain Stellar to the students, even including it in their syllabi. So you can see on the slide I have right now just a few sample of some of those promotional efforts, and you can see the color branding on there. And on the right image, it shows us someone who's using a card swipe. So when someone attends an event, they swipe their student ID and get credit for attending a Stellar event. So let's jump in and talk more about what the document and other images look like. This is, you can see our Stellar logo as well as the 6 tenants, and those are all, these were actually student created, and we try to be color consistent with each of these activities across our events on campus. Also kind of breaking out further, in looking at discipline knowledge as one of the tenets, we feel that was already recorded in a traditional transcript, leaving the other 5 tenets obviously then reflected through the Stellar record. So we figured that's how we were going to justify the comprehensive student record and how it delineates between the tenets. We have 3 badge levels when it comes to assessment for achieving Stellar in each of the tenets. First, the bottom level is considered exposure, and that's more or less just basic beginning awareness of the concept. Next is integration, and that's developing that awareness more into a more richer, deeper engagement level. And finally, transformation, which is the most difficult to achieve. A student should really demonstrate a more holistic, deeper engagement and application of key points and understanding. So one can assume then that a student should have far more exposure badges than transformations due to the complexity and expectation of those higher levels of achievement. So this also reflects how the student can be, in charge of his or her own transformative learning path.
That makes a lot of sense, Adam. It seems like you guys have a pretty rigorous methodology around Stellar. Can you talk a little bit about the technology considerations that went into supporting all that?
Right, and it was definitely quite detailed. We needed to implement new tools and processes to capture, assess, and document that learning that occurs when the students engage in the curricular and co-curricular transformative learning experiences. So the project scope included finding a solution that allows students the ability to monitor their own active learning through the use of this online badging process I just mentioned, but we were also conscious of needing to provide a living record of their achievements and the flexibility to showcase evidence of their learning experiences to those external stakeholders, whoever they may be. Since there wasn't a one-size-fits-all solution for the strategy, we leveraged multiple existing solutions on campus to achieve this goal, and which included our learning management system, which also happens to be Desire to Learn, and integrated its e-portfolio solution, as well as our campus ID card system, again, which captured participation at large events, and you saw an image of that a couple of slides ago, along with some university-developed middleware to integrate all the systems. We have course shells in D2L where we gather stellar student learning artifacts and assess them for that badge level achievement. And faculty and staff have to be trained to do this. There's also pedagogical and andragogical training that must occur. What are the rubrics and how do you use them? What's the purpose of transformative learning in your course, and how do you associate tenets to existing assignments? So we had to ask ourselves all those items. And the comprehensive student record is an in-house developed application that utilizes automated outputs from the Stellar system I just mentioned, and students can access the CSR application through our student portal in the same location they request transcripts. And I'll actually show an example of that in a few slides. Going back to this, what you're looking at now is an example of our students' mobile dashboard. So every student has the potential to participate and track his or her transformative learning, so they can see this at any time. One great thing that we're really happy about for this is that it's live, at least within a 24-hour period in terms of a data dump. So a student can view his or her updated stellar achievements without having to wait to an end of term for processing, or certainly not having to wait until they graduate. So this helps give the student a purpose and direction in conjunction with their academic plan. In talking about the badge levels, this really kind of documents what we anticipated. For students who were assessed for transformative learning, the vast majority of them merely got credit for exposure, the introduction to concepts. The integration was 27%, and as you might expect, it's pretty difficult to achieve transformation in each of those tenets, only 6% of them. And that helped provide validation for some potential critics who thought, oh, well, this is just going to be an easy thing. People are going to really just want to bump people up and really consider them transformed. Well, this shows evidence that no, they are using authentic assessment only and applying transformation only when it is deserved. So here's an example of a stellar document from an actual student, and again, as a registrar, the student did give us permission to share, so we're okay there. And this is what we will pair with a traditional academic transcript to serve as our comprehensive student record. You can see it's modeled somewhat after a traditional transcript, and that was intentional, as we didn't want the recipients of this record to think they're reviewing something completely foreign to them. Something important to mention is how this is shaped by the student. So the student is in control of which tenets to list and in what order. We wanted this to be an asset-based, formative document that showcases a student's transformative learning outcomes. If they're wanting to apply for an internship for a local hospital in an administration area, the student may wish to list the leadership or health and wellness tenets first. So the student creates this by logging into our student portal, and it will walk them through the steps on how to create the stellar. The student will have the ability to save up to 5 templates or versions of their stellar, so this should really enable them to tailor the stellar to the desired recipient. Also, you'll notice the achievements beneath each tenet. It's marked by the little triangle there. Students can have as few as 3 and as much as 10 underneath. So it makes sense that a student will pick and choose the higher achievements of transformation and integration, should they have it, and the totals of each badge level is actually accumulated toward the right of each tenet. And you'll see it there with the 1, 4, and 4 beside transformation, integration, and exposure. You'll also notice what looks like a little yellow gold medal. We're still playing around with what this may finally look like, honestly, because it made sense to us that it was a medal, which should be synonymous with a certain level of achievement, but we learned from our Stellar Employee Advisory Board that it wasn't as transparent to them. Nevertheless, having that icon means they've achieved the highest level for that badge level. So in order to get a medal for exposure, a student needs a minimum of 8 exposures. Integration requires a minimum of 6, and a student merely needs 1 to be for the transformation level. And you can see Addison's record here. She received 2 transformations for the tenet under service learning and civic engagement. And you can't see it here because this is a close-up version of the document, but at the bottom of each of the Stellar records, it will contain a tiny URL to the student's e-portfolio. And the e-portfolio was something that was designed to allow the student the ability to showcase their Stellar experiences in an electronic format that would contain those learning artifacts, such as graded papers, videos, and other assessments to show their validated learning. The e-portfolio still definitely has a role in this, but it was somewhat viewed as the output of Stellar before we were fully engaged in the CSR effort. And I'll show an example of what one looks like in a few slides. Whoops. Okay, this is the back of the Stellar, and once again, it's fairly modeled after our traditional transcript. We wanted a legend of sorts to help explain to the recipient what the various badge levels mean for each tenant. And our employer advisory board told us this was actually very helpful for them to gain a better understanding, as the Stellar wasn't as intuitive as we originally had hoped. One final thing to mention here is that we are conscious of the usage of color for the Stellar. If this were to be printed off, we didn't want any of its meaning lost if we were printed by a black and white printer. Okay, this is merely a mock-up. This is not live, but this was designed by our partners with Parchment. And Parchment's our electronic and paper delivery service for our traditional transcript. So we had hoped we could have the same storefront serve as a location for a student to order their Stellar and traditional transcript as well as the CSR together. We're not quite there yet, but I believe we're quite close. When we are expected to go live this fall, the student will have to order the Stellar and traditional transcript separately. But we absolutely have plans to try and find a way where a student can click on one icon or one button to have them both ordered. But we're not quite there yet, as I mentioned. So as I mentioned before in a few slides, the Stellar will contain a tiny URL that links to a student's e-portfolio. And this is an example of one. And again, this is entirely student created. This will enable the student to once again be in control, to shape and present their transformative learning experiences by showcasing those evaluated learning artifacts, rubrics, and ratings.
So, Adam, as you think about the communities of students that you're engaging with Stellar, are you finding that you're getting more engagement from certain populations?
Well, for the curricular side, I would say nursing, community health, and mass communication programs probably been more involved than others. The primary reason for that is we have truly engaged faculty there from those departments who are living and breathing Stellar and integrating it well into their courses. Other adopters would definitely be from liberal arts, the programs there in our museum studies and our Forensic Sciences Institute. For student communities on the co-curricular side, I'd say most students perhaps still aren't at the point where they are seeking out Stellar opportunities on their own. Once an engaged staff member promotes it and introduces it to them, students are in. They're engaged and they participate. Many of the Stellar student projects have connected to campus initiatives around student success and career readiness. So overall, we're still trying to make all students aware not only of Stellar and the CSR in terms of its purpose and usefulness as a tool to help develop and track their learning. That being said, we're conscious of the difficulty our adult and non-traditional students have for engaging with Stellar activities. Certainly, they will have opportunities inside the classroom, but we recognize it simply won't be as easy for them to partake in the co-curricular side of Stellar events, perhaps not much beyond an exposure level anyhow. But I did want to show another example in this slide of our branding and identity associated with Stellar and students. This picture was taken at our recent spring graduation ceremony, and this is actually a separate event just for students who graduated with, just for Stellar students. These were all students who graduated with a transformative level in at least one tenet. Some graduated with transformation in multiple tenets, and you'll see some students that have multiple color cords. And as you can see, the honor cord is once again color-coded to match the consistency with branding here.
That's really amazing. When you think about the kind of feedback that you've gotten across campus, are there particular groups of stakeholders that you feel like have given you the most valuable feedback?
No question. The Career Development Center has been invaluable. They're the experts in terms of talking with students, preparing them for employment interviews. So we partner with them to talk with employers at our spring 2017 job fair about the Stellar printout and the traditional transcripts, so therefore the CSR. Ask them if and how they'd use it and what Stellar is doing at UCO to help students stand out. Also, the Career Development Center is working with their staff this summer to begin coaching students both in how to best communicate their skills through Stellar e-portfolio and how to best lay out that printout. So this process has actually helped them to prepare for interviews better because they have to be more conscious of what it is they're going to be sharing with an interviewer. Information technology has also been invaluable. With all the special custom coding we needed, we absolutely depended on IT. Student Affairs units, certainly the Office of Institutional Effectiveness, and of course our two main committees, the Stellar Project Team and the Transformative Learning Steering Committee, which that's also a cross-representational campus team anyway, that provided valuable input to help us form Stellar and the CSR. Great. So next here, I wanted to show just a quick slide on impact and retention we've noticed from students who participated in Stellar. On the left, you'll see students who were part of a Title III target population, which represented the low socioeconomic, first-gen, underrepresented populations, and on the right are students who were not part of that population. But in both groups, students who achieved either a low or high Stellar, low meaning exposure, high is integration and transformation, had higher retention than those within each population group. Certainly more research needs to be done about this, but these were encouraging findings so far. And likewise, you can see a similar potential impact on Stellar students when it comes to their GPA. So for 3 semesters here, you can see how those who achieved a low or high Stellar assessment had higher GPAs in the control group of Title III students when compared to those with no Stellar experience. But again, as a caveat, we obviously need to do more research there. So some takeaways from our efforts so far. Hopefully you've heard me kind of reinforce this notion of involving everyone. It has to be a cross-representative team from so many departments to achieve the goals. Message well to faculty. For us, Stellar does what we think we know faculty want to accomplish anyhow. So you have to make sure they are instructed and don't feel threatened by it, and really should really see the benefits of the impact it has on students to recognize what they're learning in the class and outside the class. Finally, work with employers. That Stellar Employer Advisory Board has been so key to tell us what directions to go, what advice to give, where we're going wrong, what we're doing right, etc. So they've been extremely helpful. And finally, at the bottom here, there's a link to our Stellar page so you can learn more about the concepts presented today. And Jeff King, I have to give a highlight to him. He's sort of the brainchild, the madman behind all of this, so you can certainly email him with more questions.
That's great. And so there's obviously a lot that goes into the process of Stellar on campus. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage governance on such a large scale?
Right. And while it may sound overused and cliched, leadership starts at the top. Transformative learning was a notion President Betts championed when he was provost here over a decade ago, so that's where the ideas and concepts first translated into actionable momentum and has slowly built up over time into our common institutional dialect now. We recognize that faculty, as I mentioned, are absolutely key in terms of embracing the incorporation and intentionality of teaching transformative learning concepts in the class, and we had fruitful and engaging conversations about it. Many faculty argued that they already teach these concepts, and they're right. However, we didn't have a method or tool to document and track those outcomes. Getting faculty on board and having a few key champions in faculty of Stellar, and now the CSR has really helped keep the pinwheel moving and has maintained a shared ownership in the governance of these projects. And really the recognition Stellar has garnered along with the participation in the CSR effort has just been tremendous. UCO is recognized by the Wall Street Journal Times of Higher Education rankings as being in the top 10 colleges where students feel most engaged. So that type of recognition really helps offer validation of these efforts and the impact it has upon achieving student success. So, and kind of entwined with that question, Jason, here's a description of our Stellar project team, and you can see how cross-representational it really is. We have folks from Residence Life, the UCO Library, certainly student leadership programs, university communications, IT, multiple student affairs staff, and much more. It certainly takes this group being centrally focused, but also representing their respective areas to make sure Stellar and now the CSR function well. So my final slide here, just to throw this out there, I want to mention UCO CSR team. Really, I am the substitute teacher when it comes to presenting this information. If you're wanting to connect with the real drivers of this effort who have been there from the start, it's the individuals you see here, especially Dr. Jeff King. So I know we're running low on time, so that's the end of my presentation.
Well, again, thank you so much, Adam. That's really great information, and it's an interesting comparison between UMUC and UCO in terms of being able to take different paths to engage the students and bring better support forward. So that's really great for sharing for both of you. Thank you. We did have a couple of questions. I'll encourage the audience to please use the chat function so we can answer any questions that you have for either or both of our panelists this afternoon. So if we go back a little bit, Anne-Marie Vickery asked a couple of questions as it relates to the transcript, and I'll pose them to both of you. As you have these extended transcripts or the stellar CSR type transcript, Adam, in your case, how did those kind of relate to the traditional academic transcript? How are you thinking about them in terms of review, and what is the relationship that you see those transcripts having with the traditional transcript?
Well, they obviously are intertwined. Going back to what we stated as being part of our institutional mission and now having transformative learning as part of that mission, we have to see how we're performing in that regard. We just have to continue to have it worked into our institutional vernacular. We've had our student orientation programs where we're talking more about it directly with students to make sure they understand that it's not just about the classes you take and just about the grade you receive in them, what outcomes, and having them be more intentional about a direction where they're heading, what goals do they want out of their experiences here, inside and out of the classroom, and this is now the way to document that, to not just rely on the traditional transcript and the impact it may or may not have. They need to be more purposely engaged with it. Now, I'm not quite sure about that. The question is phrased as terming review for faculty in this, but as far as we're concerned, that is built into some elements of faculty assessment, how well they are integrating transformative learning into their classroom. They're required to have at least one stellar tagged assignment in each and every class that we have at UCO.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I think from our side, yeah, it's much the same. Our population being largely, mid-30s, and so I think it is likely we'll weigh heavily in on the side that really works on creating how we get this data from one place to the other. The integration component, the ability to use our learning management system and whatnot, and from that point of view, I think we're starting to think of it almost less as a transcript to some degree and more as a tool that kind of grows and moves and works with the student. I think very much like the stellar concept, it's not at the end of the day you're just going to get this report and you're going to go, great, here's what I did. We want you to use it, and I think for us we see there's a little bit of a bifurcation occurring between how do we present it to the student, have them interact with it, and then how do we, in an employer point of view, like with the hiring manager that we had, with applicant tracking systems and other technology-oriented HR processes, which are screening for things like keywords and whatnot, how do we not only leverage from a student side, but how do we figure out how we can move this data, essentially it's core data, to help students, reach their goals and career objectives in a way that's meaningful to everybody involved. And so I think for us there's probably, will it stay extended transcript, or will it change title, or will it kind of move into you can have it presented this way and this is a whole thing, this concept of having an ET and interacting with the information and using it, or will it be related to how do we package this in a data-driven way and allow for some discovery and for use in those types of forums. So we're not getting rid of our regular official transcript. We call it TOT, the traditional official transcript. But certainly at some point, I think it's, in a way the market will bear it out. So what becomes of more utility to an employer? Most of the ones I talk to don't much use transcripts. And some do, I get it, but for our students, not as much. Many of our students are like, I haven't been asked for a transcript in years, and they're in their third job, and they're, So I think it just does kind of depend, but they're definitely, it's not going away. I don't think it's going to replace it yet unless the demand comes from an employer, student, or both, that this has more value and use for those populations. And then I think, registrars and everyone else will have to figure out how do we respond to a different type of demand. And
I see that Anne-Marie clarified the question. We at this point, we are not using any stellar records to assess academic standing at this point, and from what I understand, I don't believe there's a discussion to do so in the near future. We have talked about possibly making some type of a graduation requirement that a student must have some type of a stellar achievement. Whether we want to really enact on that, I don't see that happening in the near future, but possibly in future years.
Okay,
And
great.
And we don't at UMUC either right now use it for probation review, although where it has become helpful is, which we didn't anticipate as an original use, is that in the new learning model you have to complete all the work in the model. There is no averaging out. You have to master every concept. There isn't an opportunity for you to, for example, get a D on a paper and an A in participation and somehow pass the class. You have to meet every threshold at the required level, which might vary a little bit in discipline, but it's probably closer to well, actually it's grad, so it's 82%. So that we could see how we might be able to use this as a tool in terms of figuring out who's not where they ought to be for follow-up and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Well, thank you, Gail, for that clarification. We are at the hour, so please do keep in mind that you have access to the slide deck in the link presented in the chat. This webinar has been recorded and is going to be available for you to access after our session today. I want to thank again Adam and Joellen. You've taken a great time here to share with the community all the excellent work that you guys are doing at your campuses, and it's amazing what you all have led to build, and I appreciate being able to talk with you guys about it very much.
You're certainly welcome.
It looks like we have just maybe one more question that came in if we have a moment. So this is from Rogers O'Neill. Would you all classify this as an administration means to sell your students to employers because of the perception around liberal arts courses not being focused on skills employers need?
So from UMUC's point of view, I mean, our mission actually is to deliver really learning relevant to the workplace. So although I might say I'm not sure you can do that without those liberal arts skills, because those tend to be the things that actually cross-discipline versus specific, perhaps, middle or higher level skills inside of a discipline. And so for us, we've always considered those to be, now they're not the same, but they're certainly two sides of the same coin in a fashion. And but however, students' understanding of those is often a little bit lagging behind their utility. So someone might not understand why they did something or what they learned in a particular course. Why, I had a history of jazz class and I was a criminal justice major, and I'm like, unless the inmates are listening to jazz, like I don't get how this is useful for me. But what it did do is it taught me amazing listening skills that I still draw upon today, and those have helped measurably in my career, and I can look back on it, but nobody told me, well, you're going to learn great listening skills or some tools to help you listen better and articulate in a more clear fashion and be able to separate out, different elements in your head. And so I think what I look at is selling employers maybe. I mean, students have to sell themselves. That's the fact of the matter. They're their own commodity. But I think what it does is it makes you really consider and think about how do you translate what's happening in those courses into value add to an employer, because I think that's there. I just think that we don't always articulate it as well as we could, and we don't help the student make those connections.
To somewhat echo what Joellen said too, I think that's one major benefit we have by having the Stellar Employee Advisory Board on hand is to tell us what is it you are looking for. They've already told us they don't really value much in the traditional transcripts, so what is it you are looking for? And they want to see evidence of critical thinking, problem solving, how well they function in teams, how they can function on their own, and that's where these records come into play. And especially by having authentically assessed, we know it's not just someone saying that they are in some student-created resume. It's actually assessed and validated through that. And it's something we also want to be more intentional with our Career Development Center. I mentioned how integral they've been in this process. We're trying to get away from that office being just something viewed as, well, I'm getting close to graduation, I guess I'll go visit that office now. We want them to be consciously thinking of that from an early point of view so they can understand, okay, I'm not just going to class to study this for this assignment and get a certain grade. This is all shaping my ability to go into a particular career field and with these particular skills. So that's another reason we're trying to start it from the very beginning between orientation all the way through graduation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you both again. Thank you to our audience for participating. And please do feel free to reference the material about this webinar to share with your colleagues.